Welcome to another episode of the Elite Investor Show. I'm here today with Bennett of Banyan Residential Group. Bennett, you come from a deep background in real estate, and I'm really excited to lean in to the lessons learned that you've acquired in your real estate career.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. It's
welcome.
Cool.
So let's start off with the beginning of the journey. What brought you to real estate?
So I got into real estate by mistake. By luck would probably be a better phrase.
Yeah.
So in 2011, I was getting ready to graduate from UF. And this, keep in mind, this is like the bottom of the recession, right? So post 2008 financial crisis. And I was planning on taking a job with a marketing company I'd been interning with. And they called and they said, hey, we're really sorry, but we don't have that position for you anymore. So I was like, all right, strike one. And then I started interviewing with Altria, which is the parent company for Philip Morris, which the interview process is great because they, huge global corporation, enormous budget for whining and dining kids that they basically want to bring on. And I lived in a house with 6 other guys, and one of my roommates and best friends, you need to have a professor recommend you in order to get into this interview process. So I got recommended by a sales and marketing professor. He got a recommendation from his accounting professor. So he and I were both going through this process together. So we're going out to dinner in Gainesville for round one at like a place, where poor college kids splurging on a $5 footlong once a week. Going out to dinner is like a big deal.
Yeah.
Round two's in Orlando, and they take you out to the Palm, and you stay in a hotel, and we go out. And like the final round, they fly you up to Atlanta, and you stay for a couple days at the W, and take you out to like a suite for the hockey game and all that. But so a couple weeks before I graduate, I get a job offer from them. And I call to tell my parents. I'm really proud. And my mom's like, if you take a job with a cigarette company, I'm going to disown you. Like that's it. I'm like, all right, well, so I literally graduated. And I'm like, all right, I don't know what I'm doing. Which, strangely, I feel like I was kind of comfortable with. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen next. And I'm talking to my girlfriend's dad at the time, who's now my father-in-law, telling him how I don't have a job. And luckily for me, rather than saying, stop dating my daughter and get out.
Get your stuff together.
Yeah, get out of my house. He's telling me about how they just took back a few properties via foreclosure because they did some private loans. They originated right before '08.
Yeah.
And so just like everything else, the loans went south, and so they found a few back on their plate. So he offered for me to go and fix up those properties and rent them out. And that was how I first dipped my toe into real estate.
Yeah.
So
trial by fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And man, talk about, you're asking about lessons. One of the first houses, so it's ironic, most of my career has been really focused within St. Pete. So that's where I moved to right after college. I personally started investing there a couple of years later, but I grew up more or less in Pinellas County.
Yeah.
And so these properties that he took back were over in Safety Harbor, and they were just like dumps, so rough. And of course, telling some 21, 22-year-old kid, it was great because I was given this tremendous opportunity to go and basically learn lessons on someone else's dime.
Yeah.
And in return, he got someone who was just like a workhorse. I was like, dude, I'm young, I don't have a family, even though I'm dating your daughter, I'm not married. So I don't have any familial commitments. So 7 days a week, I took it very seriously, and even to the point where I remember having friends that were like, dude, you're acting like you're like on Wall Street with a gun to your head. And I was like, I think I just love doing it too. That was part of it. Like I just would rather.
This man, you're getting to some, yeah.
Like on the weekends, like I liked waking up and being like, I have a responsibility to get over to this job and like see what's going on, But of course, like coming without a background in construction, like I grew up and I was really lucky. I had a great family, and we had really good work ethic instilled in us. And like every weekend, it was always like get up and help your dad around the house, and then get your homework done. And then if you have a game or anything, we do that. But I grew up like trimming bushes and like fixing sprinkler heads, but not framing houses. You know, so like jumping into a brand new rehab where I had no background, I'm like, I think we can get this done for like 10 grand. And it was like off by multiples, maybe 90 grand less than probably is right, know. So that was how I first stepped into it. And then my father-in-law then decided that he and a couple of other guys, some private investors, they were like, hey, this is working out pretty well. Regardless of me not knowing what I was doing, we got them up and running. They were working out pretty well. And they said, let's buy some more rental properties. And it was a really interesting time because, at that point, talking about 2011, 2012, I don't know who the audience is watching this, but if you weren't in the real estate industry at that time, which a lot of people had left, and that was part of what made me so fortunate to come in when I did, because I didn't know better, but if I had been in the market 4 years earlier, I would have lost my shirt just like everybody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky to get into the market when I did. These properties in Safety Harbor, they're along Base Road Boulevard, which is like gorgeous. It's, with a waterfront road leading up into Main Street in downtown Safety Harbor. And those properties, before we got them back, went to foreclosure auction. The final judgment was like, 150, 200 grand on the in waterfront, and no one was buying them.
Yeah. Wow.
So I started going out and basically bird dogging, wearing a lot of hats. So I was bird deal sourcing.
Off market mostly, or?
No, both. At first and that was it. That was one of the hardest things, I think, for me initially to learn. I had these great mentors, business mentors. My dad was a CIO in the area here, and whenever I had questions, I could refer to him. My father-in-law had started a company that took it just from an idea and brought it all the way to a publicly traded company.
Wow.
So great resources to talk to when it came to like, hey, I have a business question. But when you get out and actually are doing it yourself hands-on, it's like when you're sitting in a macroeconomics class, you're like, oh, I love this stuff, I'm going to totally apply it. And then you get out to like actually doing a deal, you're like, none of my macroeconomics applies to a deal.
Yeah.
It's so much more like in the moment and just like, kind of learning how to it's just like being like street smart versus book smart.
Yeah. It's like watching the Olympics and they like missed some landing on their vault and they're like, that was an easy one.
Right. You're like, oh, I would have stuck that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the difficult lessons was like really learning how to do the real estate stuff myself. And at that time too, like Bigger Pockets was still just like a message forum.
Yeah.
They had users just in the thousands. So like I was trying to educate myself in like, how do I find properties, right? Like how do I find off-market properties? And I'd be buying books off of Amazon, which was still kind of just like even like a book place at that point. But the problem was like those books that I would order would be outdated because like no one was writing new books on how to get rich in real estate in 2011 because the crash had happened.
Yeah.
So they were all talking about concepts from like 2005, 2007. So, and at that time too, honestly, like the risk involved was that you didn't know if the bottom we had hit bottom yet in the market.
Yeah, you don't know till later.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, but at the same time, you're like, and honestly, that helped mold a little bit of our rental strategy and what we went after because we're like, even though we don't know if the bottom's even fallen out yet, like we might buy this property and it still might go lower in value. If we do Section 8, we can basically guarantee this rent that we're going to get.
Yeah.
And so very organically, I was steered towards that just because I'm like, oh, if we can buy a property in a decent neighborhood in North St. Pete for 70 grand, we know that we can go and get a renter in there for a 3-bedroom for 1050, which was kind of like the going rate that you just could run your pro forma off of at the time.
Yeah.
And then that's what pushed me going into South St. Pete a couple years after that, knowing that same rental amount would apply into that neighborhood, and you kind of recognize an imbalance between the value of the homes and what the rents would actually go for.
Yeah.
And we still utilize that today a little bit when we go after rentals.
Yeah. I think the numbers are totally changed now though.
Oh,
tremendously.
Oh,
that same house is like 300s maybe, maybe
more.
But the rent hasn't come up to be more than the 1% rule, right?
Exactly. So we don't go after them a lot, but we do look for areas where we see the potential for appreciation, and we kind of look at the rent not as like, hey, this is my cash flow for income, but it's more of a defense mechanism against appreciation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that was the difference back then, and I got really lucky because appreciation covered up any mistakes that I made, and
I think there's something to be said about that. I just talked with Jeremy Clotter about this on this show about like 2018 to 2021, maybe 2022 may have given a lot of people a false positive.
Absolutely.
On their risk mitigation. Like, I'm really good at real estate investing.
Yeah.
Possibly to include ourselves, right? And so you really got to look inwardly. Like, am I doing the right things in the business to move the needle in the right direction? The way I think I am. is that based on a false pretense of the market having, uplifting all ships. So
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and what's the phrase after that? We know when the tide goes out, we see who's still wearing their pants. But that's a terrible paraphrase, but
yeah. Rising tide lifts all ships. Yeah. Just the opposite.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But no, you're absolutely right that I think the COVID boost that everything got, all of a sudden everyone thought they were geniuses because they're like, oh, my property's gone up X amount. But you made me remember this one deal that I always kind of cite as a difference of the values when I first got started in St. Pete versus where they are now.
Yeah, let's hear about it.
So this is interesting because it's a property that I look at every single day. I walk out my front door and it's 2 doors down across the street, so I didn't stare at it. It was this, so at the time, I'm doing Bennett signs as my marketing, right? Just guerrilla marketing is all I'm doing. So I'm putting out Bennett signs at 2 a.m. and you're playing cat and mouse with codes, hoping they don't take your sign. And I put one out by Vinoy Park, and there was some big jazz fest or concert. And I had flyers there, and luckily some guy from Old Northeast walked down, went to the concert, and on the way back grabbed a flyer. And the next day he decided to call me and go and check out the property. And it's this huge, like 3,000 square foot house that's just falling apart, and it's on a big oversized lot. And we agree on a price. We end up buying it for $79,000. I looked at it and I'm like, okay, I think we can. This is me being 23 and not knowing the cost to rehab properties. And I'm like, yeah, we can probably rehab this whole thing for $100,000. So I grab a couple of knuckle draggers. We start demoing it. And then I'm like, this is looking like a lot of work. It's a big house, so I get a couple contractors to come in and give me bids. I'm off by like $300,000, Like, okay, well, I know I have a deal here. I just don't think that I'm the guy to probably go through and do the rehab on it. And so I ended up popping it on Zillow, and we had a couple move down from New York, and they reached out to me within a week or two, and they're like, we want a property in this location that needs work, and this is exactly what we're looking for.
And you had already bought it at this point.
We already bought it. We bought it, and like probably made it worse because you're at that phase where like you start doing the demo and you're like, man, I probably should have just sold it a week ago before I ripped all the floors out. Now you're walking on floor joists on the second floor. And but we ended up selling it to them, and we sold it to them for about $200,000. So we did great, which sounds like this huge success story. And then last year it sold for 1.7. So it's like, to give you an idea, like originally we bought it for 79, and obviously the guys who bought it and lived there, they did a whole bunch of work to it, and they put a pool in and all that. But you can see the swing, just like to put it in perspective, just how low and soft that market was in St. Pete and the whole real estate market in Tampa Bay at the time.
I think worth noting, I always try to remind myself of this, like the time value of money is a really big thing. So like you have an ROI, but also the time it took to achieve that. So there was a rental I bought, and by the way, with me, everything's always for sale. If you have something you want to buy, everything's always for sale. But for me, everything's always for sale. It's just a function of the terms and the price. Everything. Property-wise, right? I found a property over in West Tampa. I ended up closing on it. I realized the rental numbers would work pretty well. I closed on it in early 2021 for $420,000. And I looked back at the historical record, and the previous owner had owned it since the recession. He bought it. I think kind of towards the tail end of the recession. I think it was like 2008 or 2009. He had bought it for $400,000. And so it went from a value of $400 to $420 in about 14 years. Right. Okay, so in 14 years, it only gained $20,000 in equity. It probably cost him $20,000 in closing costs to sell it. So he basically made nothing. That whole time, he had some principal paid out from tenants or whatever. That was fine. I only held that for about 2 years. And I think I sold it for $625, right? 2 years later. So like this is a testament of the dynamics that we're seeing in this market from 2021 to 2023. And like how fast that bump kind of boosted everybody up. And that is the reason why I sell things. If I can achieve a what I kind of would deem an unrepeatable internal rate of return or average annualized return, then I'll sell anything, and I'll either do a 1031 exchange or I'll use the capital gains to like offset via like a QOZ project or something to defer those taxes. But yeah, I tried to, if holding it longer actually makes my annualized return go down, I usually just sell it.
Interesting. We have a structure that we do with a couple of partners where we basically are paying them a dividend, we call it, for a certain amount of time. And then we have a target return that we're trying to hit. And you measure that to see, like, we can keep the excess above the dividend that we pay out in rent income that comes in, and then we split the profit when we sell.
Yeah.
And you start doing that math and you realize you're like, the longer we hold this past 13 months or whatever it ends up being, like that goes down. So you start targeting that sale date, right?
Yeah. All right, so we've covered a little bit of your path and getting
yes.
started.
Sorry, I guess I gave you like an all weaving way,
it's
but
good. We're gonna dive in. We're gonna dive in. So you kind of cut your teeth with learning by fire, with underbidding some rehabs and doing some of the work hands-on yourself.
Yep.
And I presume like you were to the point where it sounded like you were running crews.
Yeah, running crews. That was actually a huge part of my time when I was starting. So, the early part of my career, I focused on buying rental properties, and that was it. I wanted to get into flipping. I'm really lucky that in most cases I was steered away from that because those rentals that we held have really ended up being the foundation for the business that I have today.
Yeah.
It provides that passive income, and obviously over the period of time that I've had it, we've had a couple of good upswing cycles. Just coming back from the '08 crash and or financial crisis, and then also during COVID, that was a nice boost too.
Yeah. Do you remember it feeling uncomfortable or unsettling at the time?
Yeah, I was like losing sleep left and right in the first ones that I bought. When I first bought property, it was a couple years after I started working with my father-in-law, and then I started going out and had enough capital built up, which at the time was not a significant amount of capital. It was like buying a property in Childs Park in South St. Pete for $35,000 and having enough money to cover the down payment for a hard money loan, and then having the funds for the rehab, which were like 15, 20 grand. So it wasn't significant, but it was enough to get me in there. But at the time, I think based on my personal circumstances and position and financial situation, that was a huge undertaking, because you're just like, well, this is my everything, right? Like if this doesn't go right, I'm out. And like, even though in the scheme of things, it's not this enormous financial commitment, like it's all relative to what you have at risk.
Completely. I try to remind myself of that so often. And man, what you're saying is so powerful, because I feel like this is a testament to this narrative I remind myself of, like the work that everyone sees now. Bennett's out there crushing. He's got all these great projects. Like he must be so lucky. Like the work everyone sees now is predicated by the work nobody sees.
Yep.
Nobody saw you like losing sleep. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna make this project work. Like this feels uncomfortable, but I know I feel this calling for a higher purpose, and I know I need to do this, and it's challenging me, but I'm also learning and growing. It's like, man, that's all. That's like that internal war.
That's a great narrative to be to subscribe to. Absolutely. Yep.
And I feel like every time that maybe not every single time, but consistently, when I feel that challenge as an entrepreneur, my instant reaction is like, oh my God, this again? But usually when you get through it and you're on the other side of those lessons learned, that's when that level up comes.
Absolutely, yeah. You need to, it's such a cliche thing, but like you need to get uncomfortable, right? That's definitely where personal growth takes place. And I can tell, you're obviously huge on personal growth, right?
It's everything.
It's addictive.
It's everything.
Right?
I wanted to talk about that with you too, because like you're clearly into fitness, like wellness seems to be a priority for you.
Yeah.
Has that always been kind of like your part of your personality, your characteristics, or?
Yes and no. Yeah, growing up, I was always an athlete, always very competitive. And so like that was ingrained in my nature. And then a little bit in my 20s, I actually lost that, I think, in a fairly normal story of just being like young, and you're like, oh, like you can't eat like you used to and all that. But part of mine was compounded because I was so into my work, like that. And so I started kind of picking up just bad habits just based on like, trying to balance work and social, and then you can kind of put your health to the side. When you're young, like you don't quite realize the importance of that, right?
Yeah.
But I got to a point where, I basically was like, hey, like I'm not happy with where I am. Like, you start separating like what are my goals, and you're like, okay, I'm doing pretty well in this one. I'm doing well, in my marriage. I'm happy with that, but I'm not really happy with my own progress personally. Why is that? It's like, oh, because you're not giving yourself enough, you're not placing enough importance on setting goals for yourself aside from just professionally, right?
Yeah.
And so I got back into working out, and immediately, one of the most important things I think with exercise is it's not just the physical benefit, but it's the mental benefit, right?
Huge.
And there's science. I'm so far removed from the medical field, but like obviously it releases endorphins. It's good for you, and it makes you feel better. I don't think it's just that sense of accomplishment. I think it is literally your body giving you that reward system of like, thank you for putting us through that today. But so I was just doing a lot of like weights and typical crunch fitness kind of gym stuff. And I had a girlfriend from college that we met up and she came down for a party we were having on Memorial Day or the day before Memorial Day on that weekend. And everyone else is partying and doing their thing, and she wasn't drinking. I'm like, what are you doing? Are you what are you trying to be healthy for? She's like, oh, I'm doing this thing called Murph tomorrow. And I was like, oh, what's Murph? And I read about it, and for some reason it just clicked. I was like, dude, that's so inspiring. Like, and so the next day I started training for Murph for the next year, and for like that was it. I was just dialed in and focused. I'm like, I'm gonna do this. I've never done CrossFit before, and I never walked into a CrossFit gym. And a year later, I walked into a CrossFit gym and did Murph, strict because in CrossFit pull-ups are like these gymnastic pull-ups.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't done CrossFit, so I didn't realize you got to do those. So I'm doing 100 strict pull-ups. And somehow out of all that, I just got like completely addicted to it. I loved it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many parallels when it comes to CrossFit, but whatever your physical outlet is, I think everyone has a different thing that they're drawn towards. I find mine in CrossFit, and it really is a sport that promotes mental toughness, and that's something that I really do keep as one of my principles. Outwork is one of my personal values, and it's one that we have on our wall in the company too. And just because that's a reflection of me, but it's always been something that I've personally kind of taken as my approach. Like, I typically don't walk in the room. I definitely don't walk in the room as the smartest person. Hopefully not the dumbest, but maybe in this room. But I growing up, like anything that I achieved, it was never something like, oh, he's just naturally really good at that sport. Like, I'm 5'7". Like, I'm not gonna walk into a basketball court and be the best guy, But so I would be like Mr. Hustle. Like, I figure out like what I need to do to outwork everybody else so that I could be good and like make that team. And that wasn't basketball because that wasn't my sport, but wrestling, like those gritty type of sports are usually what I was drawn towards.
That trait though is an unfair advantage in itself. The capacity to outwork others. I think it's important to also realize that if you're not working smart, then it can only take you so far. If you do a lot of dumb things over and over. Like I try to remind myself of that. Make sure you don't learn the same lessons over and over and over, because you're not actually like improving if you do that. You can grind and not sleep and do all these things, but if you're doing it like an idiot, you're not going to grow.
Well, it is interesting. I feel
and
like
I wasn't accusing you of being an idiot.
No, I appreciate it. No offense taken. But I do feel like there's almost a little bit of an epidemic right now where it's people trying to like compete with how much they're working. Like it's like that's the measure of their success, rather than like you're saying, like the true measure of personal growth is like, are you learning these lessons? Are you improving as a person so that you can work smarter, and that gives you the ability over time, I think, too, to actually like decide, what are my personal goals? Like what do I value? And like for me right now where I am, I have a 2-year-old son at home, and like that's my priority. That's what so for me, I'm like, I want to work smarter so that I can afford to spend more time with him.
I've been really thinking a lot more about this lately, like the contrast between control and freedom. And so like as a solopreneur, I think Alex Hormozy said some stuff about this, but like as a solopreneur, you're doing everything on your own at first. And for most people, you do have to start there. And when you're doing that, you have a huge degree of control, and you have certain ways you want things done to yield a certain result, which is usually success. When it's not done that way, you reiterate on the process, make it better. But that's all you controlling that. And then as you grow, you have limitations on your capacity and a limitation on your time. And so you have to outsource extra help to support your capacity now. To do that and actually enhance your freedom, you have to relinquish some control. Right? And so this smacked me right in the face. This is funny we're talking about it now, but this smacked me in the face this week. It's like the most successful leaders of their business, they're probably not like digging down in their marketing departments, like the copyright that they wrote for an email that's going out. And and I find myself doing, Felix is going to laugh behind the camera right now, but I find myself like doing those things sometimes. And I'm like, stop.
I know.
Like stop. If you want freedom, then you have to let go of control. And implement lessons learned. Don't be blind to the growth process, but you have to let that process like chart its course.
Well, that's so well said, and it really resonates with what you're saying, because you're talking about changing the copy and stuff. I am so guilty when we have a listing come up and I'll have someone write up the listing and I'm like, send it over for my review. And then like an hour and a half later, I'm like, we're doing the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's just because that's something that I like doing. I like writing, and then it gets sent over. But I'm like, this is not the best use of my time. Like, they put together a pretty good listing. Like, no one's gonna be like, well, this isn't perfect prose, so therefore we're not going to go and do a showing at it, But it is so hard to relinquish that control over that kind of stuff.
I think something that has helped with us, and we're still kind of iterating on this, but like a list of things that, and I'm changing this list from time to time too. A list of things that I want you to do and never tell me about. A list of things that you should do and then tell me about it once it's done. And then a list of things that I don't want you to do unless we talk about it first. So like that helps empower the team, I think, to understand your boundaries and your expectations.
Sure.
So if it's unclear, like just reference that list. So like here's an easy example.
That's an interesting way to. And what do you have that just saved in whatever you guys use as your central hub?
Well, right now I'm still modifying it. We've been working together as a team for like everybody all together. My main leaders, which is like marketing and ops right now. We've been working together for a year now.
Okay.
So I think they have a pretty good understanding where that is, but I think we could do a little bit better. By the way, we'll talk about don't let perfect be the enemy of good here in a second. But here's an easy example. If like for people who are watching this, if you want to find a place to start, this might be one, just like pricing. So if you are mostly a solopreneur and you have a small team, let's say you have a cost threshold that you want your team to be able to pay for things without having to consult with you. So for us, that might be like $200 or less, pay for it. I don't even need to know. If you can justify it and you think it's important, pay for it. I don't need to know. $1,000 or less, go ahead and pay for it. I still want you to be able to justify it. And then just tell me after, or 200 to 1,000, I should say. And then more than $1,000, like let's have a conversation about it because I want to make sure it's actually going to be like an investment in the business to yield a positive result. So that's like a quick, easy example.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So we try to follow that because this kind of reminded me recently. I'm getting asked a lot of questions during the day. It's like I just kind of like. I don't mean this offensively, like I kind of want you to figure it out. That's like we're a problem-solving team.
Yeah, we have solution seeking as one of our principles.
Man, what are the principles? But
it's such a good one. Like you're saying, it's like how do you define that with someone? And you're outlining a really good way to give those rules basically of when you come and talk to me about a solution. We've always said it's like, well, come to me. Don't come to me with a question, come to me with a couple of solutions, and then we can talk about it, right? But to yours, it's like, okay, well, let's take it a step further. So it's like, because you don't want to deter your team from coming and speaking with you on valuable things, right? Like I want to be participating in what's going on, and I don't want you to feel like for some reason I'm unapproachable. And I'm definitely not. We have a team of 6 people, so it's like very approachable. We're all in a room this big typically. But again, it's not even going to just help us as being the leader in that. It's also helping them as individuals, right? Because
100%.
Then next time they have that question, they're like, well, last time I figured out how to do this and everything worked, so I'm going to do this time,
I think that's perfect. Going into the don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If every time as a leader, let's say you have that high degree of control, you're doing things all on your own by yourself, and you bring on a new person, that person probably needs to learn a little bit, right?
Right.
And they learn on the job through experiences. And so if you jump over the top every single time they do any little thing, and by the way, I'm speaking just as much to everybody as I am myself, because I'm guilty of it too. But if every time there's any little thing, you jump in and fix it every single time. Like, let's not send it out that way. Can we send it out this way? I was texting you about this morning, Felix. Like, should we say it that way? But we went with your direction, and that's totally what I want. If every time you're like, let's change happy to glad, let's change the period to a comma, all this stuff, how will they learn?
Right.
And how are you actually empowering them to grow? Because if you force feed the answer to train them to be a robot, which they won't, they're human, they can't be a robot, then how are they going to build the capacity through experience to actually deliver the result and be the long-term kind of like contributor to the team dynamic that you want? And so I try to remind myself, that's like one of my big mantras, like don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If they have a good solution and they can implement that and they can even feel empowered to do that without you having to have constant oversight, good. We don't need perfect. Yeah.
You meant, and that's great. I think that's such a good mantra to have and instill within the team. You talked about bringing people into your team dynamic that kind of fit that. Mm-hmm. How do you think you go after it? Because I'm trying to figure this out in my head. Find people that are basically capable of having that autonomy. Because the ones that I've brought into my team, frankly, it's been by luck, I think. It's been, we hired a property manager, Jazz, and she is just a rock star, but it was going through interviews and obviously we selected her based on credentials and vibing well with us and all that. But like, how do you find that personality trait that brings that in, where someone can not just help support your weaknesses, but like literally take a whole different side? Like my partner John, that was when he and I got together. It was just because I needed help. I was like, hey, I need eyes. I'm doing all this texting marketing right now, and it's actually starting to take off. I got a couple of VAs, but I need some boots on the ground. And he came in and he was so engaged and also just like capable on his own that now he just runs that whole side of our business like autonomously.
The off-market acquisition stuff?
Yeah.
I'll prove to you it wasn't luck.
Okay.
I'll prove to you right now it wasn't luck.
I'll take it.
You had an interview process?
Yes.
Okay.
With Jazz. We'll think about property manager. Yeah.
Okay, but you had...
Because John and I met in the gym, we were just talking, and I was like, you want a job? Come on. So.
Okay, do you believe that you have high standards for results and excellence?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you communicate that during any kind of interview and onboarding process?
Yes.
Okay. Did you, whether it was formal or informal, and when I say informal, kind of like mentally to yourself,
sure,
did you kind of evaluate their character and culture?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually it's interesting because this is unique to that property manager position for us. So all the things you're talking about, do you hold them to a high standard and all that? Yes, because I was in that role personally before, and then so I knew exactly, this is learning by doing, and I think that can be important in growing a business, right? Like when you've done it all yourself, you know exactly what you're looking for in that role. Mm-hmm. Difficult is when you want to grow into an area that you're not familiar with, right? And then you got to go kind of learn. But so I was the one in that position, and then my wife actually came in and helped in that position as I was trying to grow there. So yeah, anyways, to your point, yes.
Well, I don't think it was luck. We just proved it, right?
Yeah.
Like you had some kind of process. Maybe it wasn't a perfect process. It probably was a good process. It yielded a good result. And the entire time you had some manner to evaluate before they came on and after through that onboarding.
Yeah.
So it's not luck.
Yeah.
None of it was luck.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Makes me feel warm and fuzzy now. I appreciate it.
As far as the way I do it, I've made a lot of missteps with hiring.
Yep.
The work that we see now is predicated by the work nobody sees, right?
Right.
I went through, none of them were bad people, so I want to get that out up front, but I went through, I think, 7 different iterations of a version of an assistant / ops associate / ops manager.
Sure.
A lot of that was on me because I failed to properly characterize the role and what tasks a person would be doing in the role. And so what I started to eventually realize is, well, first of all, really define what the role is and like be really sharp on what they do and don't do. And then also, I exclusively hire based on culture now. It's part of our hiring process, and I won't hire someone who isn't the right culture.
Yep.
So I have them take like a cultural personality test.
Yeah.
And that tells me, and actually I sat down with Felix when I hired him, and I'll have him take a cultural personality test, and I'll actually compare it to mine and show him both of ours.
Interesting.
And I highlight like green, like these are the areas where we're really gonna work well together, and then highlight like things in yellow that are just like, hey, these are things that we probably need to be aware of around each other. And then highlight things in red, or I might have circled or whatever.
Yeah.
That's like, hey, these are potential like real friction points. Like I'll tell you one for us is like, Felix enjoys a high degree of trust and autonomy like pretty quickly in his work.
Okay.
With me, to earn my trust, you have to deliver at a savage level every day.
Yeah. Like
it's relentless.
Yep.
And like, that's just how I am. Like that's not likely to change very easily. So it's like, well, let's communicate about this before you're on, because you need to know that's how I am, and I need to know that's how you are, and understand that about yourself. So it's been great.
That's awesome. So, that's really cool. So go ahead.
Easier to have that conversation, right? Like before we're working together, rather than like 2 months in, and we're both frustrated. We both are agitated about like what's going on,
right?
Because we haven't really covered like expectations, and we had this whole level of uncommunicated assumptions.
Yeah,
it's a terrible way to do it.
So what do you guys do for your test for onboarding? Like, what is the culture test that you put in there?
We've been using the culture index.
Okay.
So yeah. So it's the culture index. It has like a profile. Like I'm a pretty hardcore architect.
Okay.
With like a super high drive.
Yep.
And pretty high attention to detail, low empathy. And so like there's certain traits that go along with my personality that people will work well with, and certain ones that don't work well.
Interesting.
I think Felix is a specialist. I want to say Felix is a specialist type. Giselle is a rainmaker, actually, which was interesting because we had talked yesterday about are like sometimes we'll do leadership sessions within my team because
Yeah.
I truly believe great leaders build other leaders.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly trying to empower my team to grow as leaders within their own field. But we had a talk yesterday on one of our team calls about their growth as leaders, but what is the one thing in a business kind of dynamic that they really, really, really love right now and they also enjoy?
Mm-hmm. My goal in 2025 is to utilize social media a lot more as a marketing platform for us. So I've been interviewing and trialing 2 or 3 different editors overseas, which this goes back also to how difficult it is to give guidance on stuff that you don't know anything about. You're like, I want it to look this way. How do I actually give it? But like, it's tough giving feedback on edits, you know, and it does take a little bit more time. I think the reason a lot of people don't pursue the social media marketing is because it requires you to sit there and like go through and be like, okay, at second 23 through 26, like let's get rid of this. Like, do you do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, I still do. I still
Yeah.
will do because I want to make sure, like, so how we have it set up right now. And this is pure open candor. We get the content calendar ready for my review.
Yep.
And then I'll review like the caption with the video and the edit.
Yeah.
And if it's not right, I'll just put a comment in there like, hey, this doesn't really match what we're going for with this video. Just
Sure.
like just edit it.
Right.
And when it's ready again, like just shoot me the update.
Yeah.
So we do that like the week before it's ready, and then it's good for the whole week. So
Yep.
we got a lot of, we do Instagram every single day of the week. Sometimes we'll hit a double day, like if there's a photo or whatever.
Yeah.
And then LinkedIn, we'll usually do, 1 to 3 posts on LinkedIn per week, typically.
Interesting.
Maybe 2 to 3. YouTube is about that's kind of new for us. That's like once every 2 to 3 weeks.
Are you trying to monetize off of YouTube eventually?
No, not yet. I think for us is like, I do believe in the concept of purpose over profit.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, if we can share, like today, people are going to watch this video and be like, that really instilled in me the reality that like I just need to go ahead and take action. That might be imperfect action.
Sure.
And Bennett did it this way when he was young and it felt uncomfortable to him, and now look at his success.
Sure.
And like, I'm 23
Yeah.
and I need to do that, right? If that helps somebody do that, then like we have both worked together to move the needle in a positive direction. And I think I have a concept in business, like when you provide enough value to enough people, it becomes impossible to not get paid.
Yeah.
And so like
that's the truth. I mean, I think everyone actually believes that in their heart, but I think they just lose sight of it on the way of trying to get there because it's so much harder to take that path.
I think sometimes I lose sight of it too.
Yeah.
So I try to remind myself of that. But yeah, so if we're able to provide value back to people in that way, and eventually that leads to them wanting to work closer with us or like be in the mastermind group if they're in Tampa, or maybe like use a resource that we might be able to plug them in with in the future, then like that's also a good thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm going to pull as many people in St. Pete into the group as possible.
We can talk about that. Yeah, we can talk about that here in a second. I do appreciate it.
But I like having people from my neck of the woods in there to network with,
Yeah. The last thing I would say about like a team culture though is, and I tell my team this, for some people this might sound absolutely like way too savage and way too, extreme. And I'm not sorry for it. I'm not sorry for it. Like I am intense, and that's what you get with me. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. You don't get to stay on my team if you're not a champion.
Yep.
Like we are a team of champions. And I'm not heartless. I do have empathy. Like I do want to see my team grow. And I don't mean like grow in the ability to help us win. Like I want to see you win as an individual, and I will empower you with the resources to get there. I believe that like hardcore. But by letting a non-champion stay on my team is unfair to the other people who have high standards and they are delivering at an elite level. And so, the thing that I try to remind myself about the kind of like elite person I want to be and surround myself with and also have on my team, like they love accountability.
Yep.
Like elite people love accountability. Elite people love to be coached. Elite people love constructive feedback. Sure. So when I counter somebody who's kind of like opposed to that in their nature, I'm like, we're just not a good fit.
Yeah, it doesn't vibe with you.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. I just don't want you around me.
Well, there's all different sorts of teams that can get together and achieve their thing, but like you have the right to build your own the way that you want to, right? I mean, and that goes back to just enjoying your life. I mean, when you're dedicated, obviously this is who you are, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't take off that hat and go home and then like go and change your lifestyle, right?
Right.
This is ingrained across like every 24 hours a day of what you do.
Yeah.
So like you better enjoy the people that you work with and they better vibe with you.
Yeah.
I just finished reading Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah,
which is like, I think I read it years ago because it's one of those when you turn the page, you're like, I feel like I've said this before, or maybe it's been quoted so many places.
Yeah.
But there was something in there they were talking about, and it was a study into geniuses versus like basically like how strong is the correlation between if you have a super high IQ and your level of success. And they were showing that, I want to say the cutoff was like lower than you think, like 120 or something like that.
Wow, yeah.
Right? Which is, hey, that's a smart guy, but like the point is, like, if you have an IQ of like 167, it doesn't actually get you that much further. You need to apply the work that goes into it too.
Yeah.
And one of the things they were talking about in it was some study that was done along the way. And they would have people, they would give them like a noun. It'd be like rope. And you have a minute to write down as many uses for rope as possible.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really cool, like in my next hire, I want to do that because for me, like that is how I find someone who is intelligent enough, but also has a very strong part of their creative brain, which I think in real estate, like that's what's always drawn me to it. Like I loved being able to have a blend between creativity and analytical, and when you put them together, you actually find a synergistic approach, right?
Yeah,
like,
you're cooking with fire.
1 + 1 = 3 when you do them together.
Yeah.
This is like if you have someone who's super smart, they might almost be confined into like just that box of like rope. Well, you can, I don't know what the single use for rope would be. It's probably a terrible example for it, but whereas someone who can think outside the box, they're like, you can tie up a boat, you can use it for exercise, like whatever, you know what I mean? But it's like, they can think in all these different spaces quickly, right? And that's one of the things like, being able to think of different solutions quickly is a really important thing, I think, in our field.
Yeah. So what is, I know you have a lot of different sectors of real estate. So you have like the off-market acquisitions, you have agents that work on your team.
Yeah.
I saw Andrew the other day, by the way.
Yeah, Andrew's great.
Yeah. So off-market, agents, rentals, and then you also have like the ground up stuff. So can you give us a snapshot of kind of what that looks like today?
Sure. So we have 100 rental units. Most of them are based in St. Pete, and a majority of those were acquired early on in my career.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, so we go through and we every month we check the 12-month trailing cap rate to see how they're each performing, and then once a year we'll go and do like a really deep dive of like a lifetime performance into those properties.
Nice.
Right? And what we do is we add back in the improvements when we actually calculate like what's the return on this property been, because as you know, like if you want to fudge your numbers, you can, but you're only hurting yourself, right? So, because if you add improvements to your cost basis, it really doesn't move the needle that much in what the cap rate is. But like if you view it as it should be, like, hey, what's my cash flow look like?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this property's not doing well at all, right?
Yeah.
So we'll move some things in and out of there a little bit, but then we also do private lending, and that was something that I became familiar with early on through my father-in-law, because that's what they do for one of their main investments.
What's your sweet spot? To flippers or to?
To flippers. So for us, probably a majority of our borrowers are going to be ones that they're in their first few deals, so they don't quite have that resume yet to go to like a large institutional lender and get like a better rate.
Yeah.
So our rates are gonna, like our sweetheart rate is when we're selling one that we have in inventory, and we'll usually do that at 9.99%. But otherwise, we're typically looking for an 11.99%, so 12% return.
Yeah.
And if you have experience, if you have good credit, we're probably not the best one to work with on you, unless if you want to be dealing directly with someone who is the decision maker, and we're doing all I'm doing the underwriting, you know. So like if that's valuable to you, not getting jerked around, like then we're a good provider for you in that sense.
Yeah.
But one of the things you're talking earlier and asking about goals as well for 2025, trying to continue to expand upon predictable cash flow and everything that we're doing. And man, if you're looking for predictable cash flow, it's tough to beat hard money, right? I mean, it's just, and scalability up until the point that you don't have the cash to do it anymore. That's the problem with it.
On the lending?
On lending.
Yeah.
Like if there was a way to just keep getting a pool of cash to put out there, like that would be, it's such a great business because you can scale it from your desk, right? But you can't borrow against, actually that's not true. You can borrow against your loans. We've borrowed against accounts receivable, but you're kind of building a house of cards.
Yeah, I feel like the other, like let's say you started a fund too, and or a fund also,
right.
And you brought in outside capital, maybe you offered an 8% pref and some upside if you do hit certain metrics.
Yep.
The challenge I feel like is you're always going to have some orphan money that's kind of like sitting but not out.
Right.
And you're accruing pref on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
No, and that's the like we've kind of penciled out all those different options, and every single time we end up calling back. And we did. I mentioned we got a loan. We did a line of credit against our accounts receivable. It ended up being probably one of the dumbest things that I've done, because once I got it, it was kind of like, yes, got it. And then I was too scared to use it, because I'm like, dude, this is like leveraging off of leverage, and I'm relying on, it's just like, it was way too risky feeling.
Yeah.
So
put it on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we do rentals, we do private lending, we have our off-market acquisitions and dispositions side, which John runs, does an awesome job with that. And we have the two areas that we're looking to grow more would be in our brokerage. I'm the broker right now. I would like to bring in someone in the next year or two. A year would be great. That can help us grow a team to probably about 20 agents.
Okay. How many agents are you now?
Oh, we only have two right now.
Two?
Well,
Yeah.
two that are full-time agents.
Okay.
I'm licensed, obviously. John's licensed, our property manager's licensed. So we have
Yeah.
others. We were up to closer to 15 before, and ended up having people that for different reasons. So when you're first starting to grow a brokerage, this is a mistake that I made, is that it's so, like you just feel so complimented. Like when people are like, I want to come and be a part of it. You're like, oh, it's flattering. That's what I'm looking for, right?
Yeah.
This is so flattering. And you're like, yeah, come on. I'd love to work with you. Great. And you end up bringing on a lot of new first-time agents, and you realize, like we're talking about, like how do you manage properly? There's a lot of hand-holding that's involved with it. You know? And so you really need someone that they are in that role and prepared to do that, or you need to be in a position where you're designing a brokerage so that it doesn't really require people to be hands-on, and typically you're not going to get the same splits and stuff that you need to make it profitable. So
I feel like I see that. You see, the low cost, no cost brokerages. You just like pay $200 per transaction.
Right.
Like, unfortunately, I found on the other side of that transaction, maybe I'm doing a deal just for myself.
Yeah.
I'm like, this person has no idea what they're doing at
Yeah.
all, zero.
Yeah.
And I look at the name of the brokerage, it's like, oh, that's because they, per the design, like they've gotten zero mentorship.
Yep.
Versus, other, I won't name different brokerages, but you've got other ones who are like, they take a super, super heavy fee.
But they're involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so we would like to, so we learned the lessons from that, or I learned the lessons from that, really. And we'd like to kind of go back and restart and take on someone who is also in a better position to deal with the administrative stuff that is required of a broker too.
Yeah.
Right. And then what we're getting into now is some ground up construction. So we have, I think right now with the ones we have under contract, we have 12 or 13 in South St. Pete. And I've been just sitting on a bunch of these lots for probably about 10 years and kind of waiting to see what would happen. And originally, like when I first started buying in South St. Pete, these lots would go for like $5,000 and nobody wanted them because the market was so soft still. But the problem was like the lots would get dumped on, like people would illegal dumping.
Oh man!
It's like after a year, you'd have more fees in cleaning up your lot because of code enforcement than you did for your actual cost basis.
Yeah. What about just putting up a 6-foot fence, like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't fence all the way to the street there like that, right?
They just put it on the easement.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, so we ended up the lots we initially got were ones that we got through just being lucky with transactions. Like we'd buy a house and there'd be another lot with it. And we're like, yeah, we'll take that too. And that would be fenced in, so it was safe.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
But so anyway, so we really followed specifically Childs Park neighborhood in South St. Pete. That was where I bought my first rental property originally, and I think ever since, it's like your first true love. You just get like attached to the area.
Yeah.
And so I bought in there, and we tracked it a lot. We were actually putting together a portfolio offering earlier in the year, so we really got into the nitty-gritty data on it. What stood out the most to me in that neighborhood, well, two things. One, the appreciation between 2013 and 2023 in Childs Park was 837%.
Oh, you really got down.
Yeah, I had it down.
Yeah.
Whereas throughout the city of St. Pete, over that same time frame, this is going off of median sales price, it was 150%. And then the state of Florida was like 110 or something like that. So you have this one specific neighborhood that is just outpacing by a multiple the rest of the city.
It's your area.
It's our area. And since that over that same time frame, the homeownership applications every single year goes up 30%. Every single year it goes up 30%. 30% rather.
Wow.
So it's an area that we see just changing right before us. And when you look at St. Pete, is a peninsula within the Pinellas County Peninsula, which is the most densely populated county in the state of Florida. More than Miami-Dade. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, per square mile, you have more people living. And I don't know this part to be a fact, but St. Pete is the only city with a true downtown in Pinellas County. So I'd argue then the density is that much higher just in St. Pete, right?
Yeah.
So there's no more land. And so as a long-term play, there's no more land for expansion. It's all infill land.
Yeah.
So there's an inherent value just to having that land, even in neighborhoods that are maybe considered low income. They're changing. And you can see that happening right now. So we've been tracking that pretty closely, and that was what prompted me to start looking at the actual ground up development for stuff in there. There's one guy in particular, he's kind of the trailblazer. He was building these 1,500 square foot homes in Childs Park, and he was getting like $490,000, $500,000 for each one, so $330 a square foot. And once I saw that, I'm like, dude, it's time. Like, we gotta start getting the shovel.
Yeah. And that was recent?
That was a recent. It's been going on now for about a year and a half.
Okay.
And he's had multiple ones to show us comps. So we got into the design phase, and we submit for permits in our first 1 and 2 weeks, and we're kind of running. I mean, my goal that I have on paper is to build 20 by the end of 2027. So we'll see. We're gonna it's
start your clock.
Well, you know how it is too. So like if you're someone who's goal oriented, it's so important to set those goals, but it's also equally important, in my opinion, to be adaptable to those. So as you're learning, you don't just start saying, hey, I made a goal for myself to do 20 by X time period. So even though I know that this is kind of dumb moving forward, I'm going to do it so I can hit that number. It's like, well, what's your real purpose for doing that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like I would imagine one of your goals is not to do them all for free.
Right.
So there's some risk mitigation involved.
So we're starting with 2 lots for the first 2, and one of them is kind of my that's the worst lot, and it's also one of the ones that has the lowest cost basis. So I'm like, I have room for a margin of error, and my goal on that is to basically I know what I could sell it for right now, and if I can make that by going through the process of building, even though it's going to require more capital, so my return is I could just go and sell and I'd be making a great multiple return, right?
Yeah.
If I go and put more capital into that deal, obviously I'm going to lower the return that I would see on paper, but I'm going to come out of that with that much more knowledge, and that to me is more valuable, So, and that way I can also replicate that over and over again. And talking about trying to create more predictable cash flow, that's an area, and speaking from no experience, but just studying it, that seems if we can locate these lots at the right prices in South St. Pete, which we've been able to do so even in this current market, we can replicate that. The nice thing about new construction versus flips is that it takes out a lot of the variability, right? You're not going to open a wall and find that it's all rotted out, and you got to reframe it, or the decking on the roof is all bad, so you got to redo it. Are there things that go wrong? Absolutely. Yeah. But you can find a way, it's easier to put systems in place, it seems, with new construction.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, you do a lot more with that.
I've never been a big time flipper. So I don't know that I have enough volume by which to compare with flips, but I've never been the biggest flip. I've done a handful, but because of the reasons that you mentioned, sometimes you have a spread of $80,000 and it's all good. And sometimes you're like, oh man, this one thing that sometimes happens 10% of the time, occurred on this one, and we actually lost money. It's that and can you make a bunch of money on flips? Yeah, there's people in the group that do it. There's people, we see people do it all the time. Well,
that's one of our goals this year too.
yeah. It's just never been my personal big thing.
Sure.
But as far as new construction, I think it's way more exactly where you're at today and what the end goal is, and you have some I guess bumper rails on how you're going to get there. One of them of which is time. So I think it's pretty predictable.
Well, I think it's for someone who enjoys doing workflows and that kind of stuff, it's so much more attractive too, because you can do a workflow and if your inspection for X, Y, and Z gets bumped, it just moves everything this way and it falls into a system. Right? Whereas with a flip, there's so many personalities that get involved too. I think you're relying on the hammer swingers to make sure that they're doing their job correctly, and it requires a lot more oversight too.
Yeah. So some primary goals for 2025. We'll talk about the market here in a second. Grow the brokerage. And get maybe a broker.
Yeah, we'd like to bring someone in to help manage that team and actually help with we try to involve all parts of the business together so it's cohesive. So basically, they would be overseeing listing some of these new projects as they come out as well. We are going to be doing quite a few flips. Our goal that we put on the books a couple months ago is for 2025 to do 50 flips.
Wow.
So we have,
all right.
yeah, I know where we are right now, and just like that, you map it out, you know where we are. So we have 7 projects right now going. So we got to pick up a few more between now and the end of the year in order to get onto that path that we want to be on to start the year to hit that.
Yeah.
We also need, we recognize probably a little bit of help in the project management side, just because John and I can't be every place at once too.
Yeah.
But we're working with some good people right now. We're working with Nikki and Chastine in the group, and they're doing great. And we have another project manager we work with pretty closely, and that's working out well. So we have that. So we have the flip goals for the year.
Yeah. Did you meet them through the group, by the way?
No, we knew them right before.
Cool.
Yeah. I knew a handful of the people in the group, and that was, for me, what made it credible, honestly, coming into it.
Cool.
Was,
okay.
Yeah, it helps, right? You do business with people,
Yeah.
and you're like, hey, I need to be getting out and networking more, and I need to be around people that are heavy hitters within my industry, that have an aligned mindset. I know that based on my past experience that we work well together and we actually bring value to each other. Where are they? And they were in this group.
Yeah.
So it was, there's your testimony.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Did you know Joe? I know you just did a deal with Joey. Did you know him before?
I knew Joey, but I don't think we've ever done a deal before together.
Yeah.
So I would honestly say that this group is probably a catalyst for that. There's definitely an element of credibility and trust that I think is recognized among people in the group. Like I see it even just my own interactions with people that we've seen each other's names floating around for a while.
Yeah.
But we probably haven't ever really done like the reach out, like, hey, I just want to give you a buzz and just like say what's up and get to know you and see if we can work together this year.
Yeah.
And because we're in the group, it helps bridge that communication.
Yeah, so we took, I don't know if you saw this, but we have this like winners index thing that's in the group.
I'm on there, dude.
Yeah, well, people are filling out every day.
Yeah.
And so it's like a PDF, downloadable PDF version, and every time anyone either comes into the group or if they fill out a form to enter their information, then it's like a Rolodex of who you are, what your background is in real estate, how you can give value to somebody else, and then what you're asking for, like in return, how somebody can maybe help you.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's a really quick reference card to be like, I have this off-market deal. It's best for a flip. Like, let me go through the winners index and look at like who's buying flips right now.
Yep.
And then also put it in the Dispo chat in the group, and like you have a local buyer.
Yeah.
So I'm like constantly just kind of like.
It's great, man.
Yeah.
What were how long ago did you start this? A year and a half?
We started October 1st, 2023.
Okay, so just a little over a year now then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were your goals when you first started this group? What did you come in with? What's changed, and where do you see it going?
So it has changed a little bit. At first, I wanted to be a place where people could grow by constantly like taking the lifelong learner approach and like bring in education resources constantly. What it truly ended up being, and it morphed into this over time, was like now it's a center of excellence for collaboration among high-level Tampa real estate investors. And so like you talked about, you come into the group, that everybody who comes into the group, it's invite only, and we have to do kind of like an interview.
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't call it that, but it is what it is.
Oh, that was one of the draws to me. It was like you want it to be somewhat exclusive.
Yeah, so you don't get access to the group if you're not a collaborative person, if you don't bring something of value, if you're a total newbie, like you're not a bad person, it's not the right fit.
Right.
And so that all gets figured out on an interview, a phone call with me. And then it's an invite into the group, and that other people have been vetted too. So there's a degree of trust, there's a degree of understanding that they're in a certain place in their real estate investing career, and they're not totally just like, I have no idea what's going on,
right. Yeah, they're coming here instead of going to TikTok to figure out how to do X, Y, and Z, right?
I think also there's an added degree of accountability. So if somebody kind of doesn't do right by you professionally in the group, like that's like, people will come to know that in our elite investor group. So the other thing that I noticed was I used to sit down with people from time to time in the past, and I've told this story before, but I would sit down with people and they would come to maybe one of the free events that we do. They'd be like, hey, I really want to sit down and pick your brain and learn about the stuff you're doing. And I had done that a little bit, and they're like, I have ABC problem. I'm like, I've seen this problem before. I've personally experienced it. I went through this a year ago. You need to do X, Y, Z.
Right.
And they would come back maybe 2 months later and be like, it didn't work. Like the solution didn't work. I'd be like, what did you do? They're like, well, I did DEF. I was like, I told you to do X, Y, Z. Why'd you do DEF? And I was like, you know what, you're conditioning me that the advice that you're asking me for, you don't actually really take that seriously.
You're not executing on it.
And you're not executing on it. And so you have now told me through your actions that like it didn't really matter to you.
Right.
It was just like, I don't know if you wanted support or maybe just like someone to talk to, but I think there needs to be a degree of knowing you're invested and seeking a solution that will work. And to me, the best way to get that is to ensure people have skin in the game and they're committed.
Yep.
Yeah, it's that simple. So that's part of, I think, what we're going for.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of collaboration within this group, which obviously is like one of the forefront goals, right?
Yeah.
When you and I first spoke on the phone, I think I mentioned something about how my perspective and my mindset of working with other investors in the space has shifted over time. It's probably one of the greatest lessons that I've learned over this time was viewing other people not as competition, but as potential collaborators.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing you kind of like perk up when I said that.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, dude, we're aligned on this, but it's true. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that's the thing. And I think maybe it goes back to just like, you know, our male instinct or whatever. Or maybe not that, because there's plenty of women that are fierce and I wouldn't want to compete with them either. But you know, viewing people not as that opponent and getting to know like what they're trying to achieve, and you realize you're like, oh, we actually can work together a lot on this kind of stuff. You know?
Yeah, most deals that we do in the business right now, I'm there in the group.
Yeah.
Right? Like somebody's like, hey, I have this deal. I know you're buying lots in Tampa. I'm like, oh yeah, off market, like, pick it up.
Right.
Yeah. So we're doing a deal. We're doing a rezoning in West Tampa right now. It's just crazy the way this all gets like full circle. So we're doing a deal in West Tampa right now, and there's a person in the group who noticed it. And they sent it over to me. They're like, I think this is your sweet spot. I was going to offer this for it. And I was like, you know, it's going to go for more than that. They underlisted it. And so he's like, you go ahead and take it. And so we're rezoning it.
Okay.
And so in exchange for doing that, I'm like, hey, I'm going to put you by my side for this whole rezoning process so you can learn exactly what we're doing, because I want there to be value for you.
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, that's great. That's more than fair. And then the listing agent who actually listed it, he saw that we were doing on social media once we were set to close. He's like, what is this thing that you're doing? So he joined the group.
Signed up. Yep.
Yeah. And so now he's helping us build out a new system that we're trying to launch here in 2025 for like kind of like a money marketplace for people to share, like your private lending thing might be interested in that.
Okay.
He's like a big systems guy. And then he told another land acquisition specialist about it, and then she joined. And so it's just crazy the way.
See the domino effect?
Yeah. And just like getting the power of getting around other high caliber people who they've learned a different set of tools and different way of doing business, and maybe even in a different niche, to where now you can give something to them maybe they didn't know before.
Right.
And they're like, hey, by the way, have you seen this?
Yeah.
And so it's just totally changed my perspective on how I knew collaboration was important before, but it's just blown my mind about how far you can really take it.
Well, check this out. So the first meetup, so I joined like 6 weeks ago, right? And the first in-person meetup we had was the one in St. Pete, which was lucky for me.
Yeah.
On 13th Avenue. It was the one that Evan and Dustin were building.
Yeah.
And it was a townhome site, but it was zoned NTM.
Yeah.
And so we had been following NTM zoning, because that's a new, relatively new zoning, maybe a year and a half old in St. Pete, that had been introduced. And the whole idea of that is so those corridors before were typically zoned like NT1, NT2, which were single family dwellings for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And we had this missing middle housing crisis, evidently, right? Yeah. And that was their solution to it, was taking the properties on these main corridors and changing the density allowance so that you can do 60 units per acre, but they put these really strict design standards into place. And so you do 60 units per acre, but you can't have more than 4 units per structure. So it's like, it kind of eliminated. And we got a couple of lots, like we were really pumped. We're like, oh dude, this is gonna change the game. Like we can't wait to get our hands on some of these things and see what they do. And so we got a couple under contract right when it came around and changed. And we talked to some investors that were, developers or whatever that we thought would be interested. And they were like, well, like, we don't really get it. We don't understand it. And I'm like, well, let me go to zoning and talk to them, and I can come back. And zoning was saying, they're like, we don't really get it yet either. Because they're like, no one's brought it through. No one's done a project. So they're like, all we know is that, yes, like, the same stuff we do, like on the code, but we don't know how the building department is going to approve or disapprove some of these design standards. So we didn't really pursue it any further. Like we'd get a property and everyone would be like, oh, it's NTM. And we'd ask them the same questions. We're like, well, what does that mean? They're like, oh, we don't know. We just thought it would be a good marketing thing.
Yeah.
And then so we went to the meetup, and seeing someone that had actually gone through and was now building and showing what the potential of just a single lot in that zoning was really groundbreaking and interesting for us.
Yeah, pun intended.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And so it's just like that cognitive bias, like you start thinking about red cars and all of a sudden all you see are red cars, right? It's not that there's more red cars out there, it's just that now you're focused on it, you're looking for them. And within the next couple of weeks, John got one under contract in NTM on a double lot that we have interest in right now, really good interest from some developers, but we're actually thinking about just taking it ourselves and bringing it through the redevelopment plan just to kind of learn the process. And then the following week, I got one under contract also on a single lot. Both of them were in Kenwood, which is a great neighborhood in St. Pete.
Yeah.
And we ended up, even though we were looking at it NTM, we ended up flipping that one to a flipper this week. But anyway, it goes to show you just like when you have that exposure to it, right? And you're looking at it, like we would have had no idea if we hadn't been educated by someone else that was actually implementing that and acting on it, you know?
I love it.
It's cool.
Cool. Man, this has been a great session.
Yeah.
I think we go all day.
Yeah.
We go all day. We might have to do maybe a year from now, 2025, like a part 2 or something.
Sure, yeah.
If somebody hears something on this, if they watched it and they want to plug in with you for the brokerage thing, if they want to work with you in any aspect, like what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Okay, so especially right now, if you're a realtor, we are looking for flips. We're looking for block properties in Pinellas County and non-flood zone. Value proposition is if you bring us the property, we're not taking any commission up front. You keep both sides. And when we finish the rehab, you get to list it on the backside. 727-385-5586 is my cell. Shoot me a text, give me a call.
Man, you're a brave man. If this channel blows up, then...
Blow it up, yeah.
That's awesome. Man, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I
Thanks for having me.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah.